They say trust is the foundation of a good marriage, and for most of our 12 years together, I thought we had it. My wife, Jessica, and I were the picture of a suburban dream. 2 kids, a cozy house, and a routine that kept life predictable. Sure, things weren't perfect, but whose marriage is? I first noticed the change in Jessica a few months ago. She started dressing differently, nothing too dramatic, but enough to catch my attention. Low-cut tops, bold lipstick, and heels for errands. Just spicing things up, she'd say with a dismissive laugh when I teased her about it. I didn't press the issue. I thought she deserved to feel good about herself. Then there were the late-night texts. She claimed they were from her book club group, but the smile she wore while typing didn't feel like it came from discussing novels. Our sex life, which had been steady even if not passionate, became non-existent. Jessica always had an excuse. Tired from work, stressed about the kids, a headache. At first, I believed her, but doubt crept in like a shadow I couldn't shake. Then came the slip. One evening, as Jessica was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't touch it, but the name that lit up the screen wasn't one I recognized. M. The message. Last night was perfect. Can't stop thinking about you. My heart stopped. This was the moment the walls of my trust began to crumble. I stared at the message, my hand trembling as I placed the phone back down. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe it was harmless. Maybe M was a woman from her book club, and they were just being dramatic. But last night? What could that mean? When Jessica came out of the shower, I forced a smile and acted like nothing was wrong. I hated myself for it, but I needed to know more before jumping to conclusions. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention. Jessica's behavior had shifted even further. She'd suddenly announce she needed to run out for errands late in the evening, despite there being no pressing need. She'd spend hours helping a friend from work but return home with no evidence of what she'd been doing. I decided to check her phone again, this time when she was fast asleep. The messages with M were gone, deleted, every last one of them. She wasn't just being careless. She was actively covering her tracks. Still, there was no denying the clues. She was showering twice a day, wearing perfume to the gym, and even being cagey about her schedule. The last straw came when I followed her one evening. She told me she was meeting her friend Ashley for coffee, but my gut screamed otherwise. Parking a few spots away from the cafe she mentioned, I waited and watched. She didn't go inside. Instead, she climbed into the passenger seat of a black car that pulled up moments later. I couldn't see the driver, but the way Jessica leaned in, laughing and touching their arm, told me everything I needed to know. My stomach churned with anger and disbelief. There was no denying it anymore. Jessica was having an affair. And now I needed to figure out just how far this went. The anger burned hot that night, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I confronted Jessica now, she'd lie her way out of it, just like she'd been lying for months. I needed proof. Proof that would leave her no room to twist the story. The next day, I called in sick to work and installed a discreet camera in our living room while Jessica was at her office job. It felt wrong, like a betrayal of the trust I'd always believed in. But she'd broken that trust first. If she was bringing her affair into our home, I wanted to catch it. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I checked our shared credit card statements and found charges at hotels and restaurants I'd never heard of. She'd bought lingerie, expensive pieces I'd never seen her wear. The camera footage, however, turned up nothing at first. Jessica was careful, almost too careful. But one Friday afternoon, while I was reviewing the recordings, I caught her pacing in the living room, phone pressed to her ear. "Not tonight," she said in a low, hushed tone. "It's too risky. He's been acting weird lately, asking questions." I felt the blood drain from my face. She was talking about me. "I'll figure something out," she continued. "But I can't wait to see you again. You make me feel alive." I clenched my fists, trying to keep from smashing the monitor. Alive? Was that what I wasn't giving her anymore? The call ended, and she left the house shortly after. This time I followed her again, determined to see who this man was. She drove to a small park on the edge of town and parked in a secluded area. A few minutes later, the same black car pulled up. A man stepped out, a tall, well-dressed guy who looked about 10 years younger than me. They embraced, and my heart shattered. I took photos from a distance, my hand shaking as I documented every moment. Her smile, her laugh, the way she kissed him like she'd never kissed me. Now I had my proof, and now I could plan my revenge. That night I didn't sleep. The rage, the humiliation, and the cold determination to expose her betrayal kept me wide awake. By morning, I had made my decision. I wouldn't confront her yet. I needed her to feel comfortable, to think she was safe in her lies. Only then would I strike. At breakfast, I played the part of the clueless husband. I asked her about her day, kissed her on the cheek, and even complimented the dress she wore to work. Her smile seemed brighter than it had in weeks, and for a brief moment, I hated myself for still loving her. Over the next few days, I set the pieces of my plan in motion. I created a folder containing the photos I had taken, screenshots of the financial records, and a few key timestamps from the camera footage. This wasn't just for my confrontation. I wanted this ready for anyone she tried to spin her story to, whether it was friends, family, or lawyers. When Friday rolled around, I decided it was time. She came home late as usual, claiming traffic had been awful. I waited until she was comfortable on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Hey, Jess," I said casually, sitting across from her. She barely looked up. Who's the guy in the black car?" Her head snapped up so fast I thought she might get whiplash. "What?" she asked, her voice sharp, her eyes wide with fear. "The man you met at the park," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You know, the one who makes you feel alive." Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the coffee table. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, her voice trembling. I leaned forward, pulling the folder from behind me and placing it on the table. "You're going to want to stop lying," I said, "because I have everything right here." Jessica's face turned pale as she stared at the folder, frozen in place. Finally, she grabbed it and started flipping through the contents. Each photo, each receipt, each damning piece of evidence seemed to drain more life from her. I can explain," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. I laughed, a bitter sound that felt foreign even to me. "Oh, I'd love to hear it, Jess. Please, tell me how screwing some random guy is something I'm supposed to understand." Her tears spilled over, but I wasn't moved. "Not this time." "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Oh, it's exactly what I think," I said, standing up. "And now you're going to see exactly what I've been planning." Jessica looked up at me, panic written all over her face. "What do you mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said coldly, walking out of the room. It wasn't just about exposing her anymore. I was going to destroy everything she thought she had. And I knew just where to start. Jessica followed me into the kitchen, her voice rising with panic. "Ryan, wait. Please, let me explain." I turned to face her, arms crossed. "Explain? You've been lying to me for months. What's there to explain?" It was just a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I wasn't thinking clearly." "Bullshit," I snapped, slamming my fist onto the counter. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. Sleeping with some guy repeatedly? That's a choice." She broke into sobs, collapsing into a kitchen chair. For a second, I felt a pang of pity, but I quickly shoved it aside. I wasn't done yet. "I'm giving you the weekend," I said, my voice cold and controlled. "Pack your things and get out. I've already contacted a lawyer." Jessica's head shot up, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief. "You're divorcing me?" "No," I said with a hollow laugh. "I'm destroying you." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I left her there, broken and crying, and walked out the door. The next few days were crucial. I sent copies of the evidence folder to 3 places. My lawyer, her best friend Danielle, and the man's wife. Yes, he was married, too. I had dug deep and found out all about him. A smug corporate executive named Michael, who lived just a few miles away with his unsuspecting wife and 2 young kids. The betrayal wasn't going to stay neatly tucked away in our home. I wanted everyone involved to feel the sting of what Jessica and Michael had done. I also moved swiftly to secure my finances. I froze our joint accounts and transferred my savings into a separate one she couldn't touch. I knew the divorce process would be messy, but I was going to make damn sure she wouldn't walk away with anything more than she deserved, which, in my eyes, was nothing. By Sunday evening, Jessica's belongings were piled into boxes near the front door. She hadn't argued or begged anymore. She just packed silently, her face a blank mask. As she prepared to leave, she finally turned to me, her voice hollow. "I don't know who you are anymore, Ryan." I stepped closer, my eyes narrowing. "Oh, I know exactly who I am. I'm the man who's about to make sure you regret every second of your betrayal." Her lips trembled as she opened the door, stepping into the night. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Now it was Michael's turn. With Jessica gone, the house felt strangely quiet. For the first time in years, I had space to think without her presence clouding my judgment. But I wasn't ready to let things settle. Not yet. I spent the next morning preparing for my next move. The evidence folder I sent to Michael's wife, Erica, included everything: photos of him and Jessica at the park, their text conversations that I'd managed to recover from Jessica's phone, and a detailed timeline of their meetups. At around noon, I received a reply. A single email. Subject: "Thank you for telling me. Ryan, I'm not sure how to process everything you've sent me, but I needed to know. You're right. Michael has been lying. I can't believe he'd do this to me and the kids. If there's anything else you think I should know, please let me know. I don't want to face this alone. Erica." Her words gave me a sense of grim satisfaction. This wasn't just about exposing Michael. It was about making sure he couldn't slip away unscathed. I replied immediately, suggesting we meet in person to discuss everything. By evening, we were sitting across from each other in a small cafe on the other side of town. Erica looked tired but determined. She pushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear as she spoke. "I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought you were just some bitter husband making wild accusations." She paused, glancing down at the folder I'd handed her. "But it's undeniable. I know how you feel," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's like your whole life turns into a lie overnight." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of shared pain between us. "What are you going to do next?" she asked. I leaned back, my lips curling into a grim smile. "I want to make sure he pays for what he's done to both of us." Erica hesitated before nodding. "Then I'm in." Together we crafted a plan. Erica would confront Michael in public, somewhere he couldn't escape without making a scene. She wanted to catch him off guard, to force him to admit everything. Meanwhile, I prepared to release the photos and texts to his professional network, a calculated move to ruin both his personal and professional life. The confrontation was set for the following Friday at one of Michael's favorite upscale bars, where he often entertained clients. Erica planned to show up unannounced, armed with the evidence. I would be there, too, watching from a distance, ready to step in if things got ugly. As the day approached, I felt an odd mix of excitement and dread. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming control of my life and making sure no one walked away unscathed. Friday night arrived, and the upscale bar buzzed with the hum of after-work chatter. Men in tailored suits clinked glasses of whiskey while women in designer dresses laughed over martinis. Michael was already there, seated at a corner table with a group of colleagues, his confident smirk plastered across his face. I stood at the bar, nursing a beer and keeping a safe distance. Erica arrived shortly after, her composure masking the storm brewing inside her. She was dressed sharply, her black blazer giving her an air of authority. She caught my eye briefly and gave a small nod. With a steady breath, she walked straight to Michael's table. His smile faltered as he noticed her. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Erica." His voice carried a nervous edge. "Sit down, Michael," she said, her voice icy but controlled. "We need to talk." The entire table went silent, all eyes on the unfolding drama. Michael hesitated but eventually sat, his colleagues whispering among themselves. Erica didn't waste any time. She pulled out the folder and slammed it onto the table. "Explain this," she demanded, her voice ringing clear across the room. Michael's face turned ghostly pale. He reached for the folder, flipping it open with trembling hands. The photos of him and Jessica, the incriminating texts, they were all there, staring back at him like a judgment. Where did you get this?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. "That doesn't matter," Erica snapped. "What matters is that you've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" People at nearby tables had begun to take notice, their curious gazes fixed on the confrontation. Michael's colleagues shifted uncomfortably, clearly debating whether to step in or pretend they didn't know him. "Erica, please, not here," Michael pleaded, his voice a desperate whisper. "Oh no, Michael. We're doing this here," she said, her tone venomous. "You humiliated me in private, so I'm going to humiliate you in public." Michael tried to grab her arm, but Erica yanked it away. "Don't you dare touch me," she hissed. "You're nothing but a liar and a cheat." At that moment, I stepped closer, my phone angled to capture the entire scene on video. Michael's head jerked up, and his eyes locked onto me. "You," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "That's right, Michael," I said, my tone calm but cutting. "I'm the husband of the woman you've been screwing behind Erica's back. And now, I'm the guy who's going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." Michael's face contorted in rage, and for a moment, I thought he might lunge at me. But the weight of the crowd's attention kept him rooted to the spot. "You're finished," Erica said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Don't bother coming home tonight." She turned on her heel and stormed out, her head held high. I followed her outside, leaving Michael to face the stunned and judgmental stares of his colleagues. Once we were outside, Erica stopped and let out a shaky breath. "That felt good," she said, her lips curving into a small, bittersweet smile. I nodded. "It's a start." But for me, it wasn't enough. Michael wasn't going to escape the consequences, not at work, and not in his personal life. The next stage of my plan was already in motion. By the following Monday, the wheels of revenge were turning in full force. Erica had kicked Michael out of their home and filed for divorce, citing adultery as the reason. But my part in this wasn't over. I wasn't content with just exposing him to his wife and coworkers. I wanted to ruin his entire professional life. That morning, I sent an anonymous email to Michael's company's HR department. Attached were the photos of him and Jessica, along with the timestamps proving he'd been using work hours and resources to carry out his affair. The email was simple but damning. Subject: Your VP's behavior, ***. Good morning. I thought you should know that one of your senior executives, Michael last name, has been engaging in inappropriate conduct during company hours. Please see the attached files for proof. Signed, a concerned individual. I didn't stop there. Using some of my saved evidence, I contacted a few key clients I'd identified from Michael's LinkedIn profile. Posing as someone from a competitor, I hinted at his unprofessional behavior and lack of integrity. I knew it would only take a few whispers to tarnish his reputation in the business world. By lunchtime, the fallout had begun. Erica called me in a fit of mixed anger and satisfaction. "They fired him," she said, her voice trembling. Michael called me, begging to let him come home, saying he had nowhere else to go. "What did you tell him?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I told him to find Jessica," she replied coldly. As for Jessica, she hadn't contacted me since the day she left the house. I knew she was probably staying with friends, but I had no interest in her whereabouts. My focus was on finishing what I'd started. I kept tabs on Michael's spiraling situation through mutual acquaintances. Within a week, he'd lost not only his job but also several professional contacts. His name became toxic, his once polished image tarnished beyond repair. One of my contacts told me he'd been spotted at a dive bar, disheveled and drinking alone. The man who once walked around with smug confidence had been reduced to a shadow of his former self. It wasn't enough for me to feel pity. He'd made his choices, and now he was living the consequences. But I wasn't done yet. Jessica still hadn't faced the full weight of my wrath, and I had something special planned just for her. I waited patiently, letting Jessica stew in her self-made misery. I had no doubt she was struggling. The life she'd built on lies had come crashing down, and the man she'd risked it all for was now drowning in his own failure. But she hadn't reached out to me, not once, and I knew why: guilt. Still, I wasn't satisfied. She needed to understand what it meant to betray someone so deeply, to have the foundations of a life shattered by selfishness. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned where Jessica had been staying. A small apartment on the edge of town, rented by one of her so-called friends who likely didn't know the full story. I decided to pay her a visit. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, her face drained of color. She looked rough, her hair pulled into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes, and the expensive clothes she used to flaunt replaced by sweatpants and a hoodie. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I thought we should talk," I said coolly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The apartment was cramped and cluttered, a stark contrast to the home we'd shared. She moved aside, closing the door behind me. "I don't have anything to say," she muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Good," I said, turning to face her, "because I'm the one who'll be doing the talking." She sat on the edge of the worn couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I stayed standing, towering over her like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "You destroyed everything," I began, my voice sharp and steady. "Our marriage, our home, our trust. And for what? Some affair with a man who couldn't even keep his own life together." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "You threw me away, Jessica. You didn't just cheat, you lied, you schemed, and you humiliated me. And now you're going to live with the consequences." "I've already lost everything," she said, her voice cracking. "What more do you want from me?" I leaned in closer, my expression cold. "I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to know the pain of being betrayed, of losing the life you thought was yours. And I want you to understand that this isn't over." Her tears spilled over, but I didn't flinch. "I've already talked to your parents," I continued. "They know everything. They were shocked, of course, but I think they're starting to see who you really are. I've also told our mutual friends. You can imagine how many of them still want anything to do with you." Jessica sobbed quietly, her head in her hands. "Oh, and one last thing," I added. "I've hired a lawyer. Not just for the divorce, but to make sure you don't get a penny more than you deserve, which, by my count, is nothing." She looked up at me then, her face red and streaked with tears. "Why are you doing this?" she choked out. "Because you didn't just cheat on me," I said, my voice like ice. "You betrayed the man who gave you everything. And now, I'm taking it all back." Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her sobbing in the silence of her crumbling world. But there was one final move I hadn't made yet. Jessica's life was already in shambles, but I wasn't done. The final piece of my plan would ensure she'd have no chance to rebuild her reputation or regain any semblance of her former life. The key was the small town we lived in, where rumors spread faster than wildfire. Jessica had always prided herself on being part of the community. A well-loved neighbor, a reliable PTA member, and someone who pretended to have it all together. That image had to be obliterated. On Monday morning, I visited the office of a local printing company. The owner, an old friend from high school, owed me a favor. I handed him a flash drive containing a carefully crafted flyer. It was simple but effective. At the top, a bold title read, "Do you know this woman?" Beneath it was a photo of Jessica, smiling brightly from a PTA event, followed by a bullet point list of her actions. Engaged in a months-long affair with a married man. Lied to her family and friends while deceiving her husband of 12 years. Contributed to the breakdown of 2 families in our community. I included a few screenshots of the texts between her and Michael, carefully censoring sensitive information but leaving enough to paint the picture. Finally, at the bottom, think twice before trusting her with your family, your marriage, or your reputation. By the end of the day, 500 copies were printed and ready to go. That evening, under the cover of darkness, I drove around town, placing the flyers strategically. Mailboxes, telephone poles, cafe bulletin boards, anywhere they'd be seen by the widest audience possible. It was petty, sure, but it was also devastatingly effective. By Tuesday morning, Jessica's phone was likely blowing up. I could only imagine the horror she felt as she realized her private shame was now public knowledge. I didn't have to wait long to see the fallout. That afternoon, one of our former friends, Shannon, called me. "Ryan, have you seen the flyers?" she asked, her tone a mix of shock and glee. "I might have heard about them," I replied nonchalantly. "Jessica's freaking out," Shannon said, unable to hide her amusement. "People are talking about it everywhere. PTA moms, neighbors, even people at the grocery store. She's basically a social pariah now." Good, I thought. That's exactly what I wanted. By the end of the week, Jessica tried to contact me. She left several tearful voicemails, begging me to stop, pleading for mercy. But there was no mercy left in me. I let her words sit unanswered, her despair echoing into the void. I wanted her to understand the depth of her betrayal, and to realize that this was the life she'd chosen. But even with Jessica broken, I wasn't quite ready to move on. There was still one loose end to tie up: Michael. He needed to understand that this wasn't just about him losing his job and family. It was about making him feel the full weight of his actions. Michael had already lost his job and been kicked out by Erica, but I wasn't satisfied. The man who had helped destroy my marriage deserved to know what rock bottom truly felt like. I started by digging deeper into his personal life. A friend of mine, who worked in IT, helped me uncover Michael's hidden secrets. It turned out he had more skeletons in his closet than I expected: shady financial dealings, missed tax payments, and a history of harassment complaints at work that had been quietly settled. This was gold. I packaged everything into an anonymous email and sent it to a local investigative reporter who thrived on exposing dirty laundry. Within days, the story was live on the paper's website. Former executive scandal, affairs, financial misdeeds, and allegations of workplace misconduct. Michael's face was plastered on the front page, alongside all the sordid details. His reputation, already teetering on the edge, was completely obliterated. But I wasn't done. Michael still had Erica's trust fund, something he had leveraged during their marriage to boost his lavish lifestyle. Erica, emboldened by her new sense of independence and rage, decided to hit him where it hurt most. I introduced her to my lawyer, who specialized in ruthless divorces. Together, we outlined a plan to drain every last penny Michael had. The trust fund? Frozen. His remaining assets? Targeted for liquidation to cover her demands for spousal and child support. By the end of it, Michael was left with nothing but debt, an empty bank account, and no allies to lean on. I heard through the grapevine that Michael had moved into a dingy motel on the outskirts of town, surviving on fast food and cheap liquor. One of his former colleagues told me he'd been blacklisted in the industry. No one wanted to hire someone with his reputation. It was poetic justice. A week later, Erica called me with an update. "Michael came crawling back, begging to see the kids," she said, her voice tinged with satisfaction. "I told him he could have supervised visits, if he could afford the fees for the visitation center." I laughed. "You're handling this like a pro." "I learned from the best," she replied. Michael was broken. He had nothing left, and I made sure he never would. But even as I celebrated his downfall, I realized there was one person I still hadn't confronted directly. Jessica's lover had paid his price. Now it was time to face my own feelings. It was time to take the next step in my life without her. As satisfying as it was to watch Jessica and Michael fall apart, there was still an emptiness in me that revenge couldn't fill. The house we had shared felt suffocating, each corner a painful reminder of what we'd lost. I couldn't stay there anymore. The first step was to sell the house. My lawyer had ensured I retained full ownership in the divorce proceedings, leaving Jessica with nothing. I listed it immediately, and within a month, a young couple made an offer. On the day I handed over the keys, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This house had been my dream, but it had also been the stage for my deepest betrayal. Letting it go felt like closing a chapter one was ready to leave behind. I moved into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No memories of Jessica, no ghosts of our life together. It was a fresh start. Erica and I stayed in touch, often meeting for coffee to catch up. We shared updates on how our lives were rebuilding after the storm. She told me how she was thriving, focusing on her kids and pursuing new career opportunities. "Do you ever think about dating again?" she asked one afternoon, her voice careful. I hesitated. "I don't know. It's hard to imagine trusting someone like that again." She nodded, her expression understanding. "It'll take time, but you'll get there. You're a good man, Ryan. Don't let what they did ruin that." Her words stayed with me. Jessica, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found. She'd gone completely silent after I walked out of her apartment. I heard from mutual friends that she'd moved to another town to start over, but I didn't care to know the details. Whatever life she was trying to rebuild, it had nothing to do with me. Over time, I began to feel the weight of the betrayal lifting. My focus shifted from revenge to rediscovering myself. I threw myself into work, took up new hobbies, and even started traveling on weekends, a luxury I hadn't allowed myself during my marriage. The more I distanced myself from Jessica and Michael's chaos, the more I realized how much they'd held me back. I was free now, and that freedom felt intoxicating. But even as I moved forward, there was one last piece of closure I needed. Something that would allow me to finally let go of the anger and pain that had consumed me for months. Months had passed since Jessica had left my life, but there was still a lingering weight in my chest, something unfinished. I couldn't move forward completely until I faced her one last time, not out of anger or revenge, but to close the book for good. Through a mutual friend, I learned Jessica had taken a job in a nearby town and was renting a small apartment. It seemed she was struggling to stay afloat, working long hours for a modest salary. The thought of her struggling didn't bring me joy anymore. It just felt empty. I decided to see her, not to hurt her further, but to reclaim the last piece of my own peace. When she opened the door, her face was a mixture of shock and unease. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice carrying none of the confidence she used to wield. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," I said, my tone calm and steady. She stepped aside, allowing me in. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, a far cry from the life we'd once shared. Jessica motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing. "I'm not here to fight," I began, crossing my arms. "I just needed to say a few things. For me." She nodded silently, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "You destroyed us," I said bluntly. "You took something we built over 12 years and threw it away like it meant nothing. And for months, I let that betrayal consume me. I let it define me." Jessica looked down at her hands, her expression crumpling with guilt. "But I'm done carrying that weight," I continued. "What you did says more about you than it ever will about me. I loved you, Jessica. I gave you everything I had, and you threw it away. That's on you." Tears began to stream down her face, but I didn't stop. "I didn't come here to forgive you," I said, "because some things are unforgivable. But I do want to thank you for showing me exactly who you are, and for forcing me to see who I could become without you." Jessica's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I don't know why I did what I did. I was selfish, stupid, and I destroyed the best thing I ever had." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of pity for her. "You're right. You did. And now we both have to live with the consequences." I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Jessica. But you won't find it by destroying the people who love you." With that, I walked out, leaving her sobbing behind me. As I drove away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It wasn't joy or triumph, it was closure. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The chapter with Jessica was finally closed, and I was ready to write the next one. A chapter where I could move forward, free from her betrayal and the anger that had held me captive. This wasn't just the end. It was a new beginning. Leaving Jessica's apartment felt like shedding old skin. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. I threw myself into my work and hobbies. I reconnected with old friends and even joined a hiking group. The focus shifted from fixing what was broken to building something new. One day, Erica reached out to update me. She was finalizing her divorce and starting a new job. "It feels like a fresh start," she said, and I agreed. Jessica's absence was no longer a wound but a scar, something I could live with and even learn from. For the first time in months, I started imagining a future that didn't include her at all. Months later, I stood on the edge of a mountain trail, the sun dipping low on the horizon. The air was cool, the sky painted in colors that felt alive. I hadn't felt this at peace in years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. The house was sold, the divorce finalized, and the chaos of Jessica and Michael was nothing but a memory. I met someone in the hiking group, a kind, genuine woman who made me laugh. We weren't rushing into anything, but for the first time I felt hope. Looking out at the sunset, I realized I'd found what Jessica could never give me: freedom, clarity, and self-respect. My life was my own, and I was ready to move forward, leaving the pain, and them, far behind.